what we're ultimately building is this like de-extinction toolkit that can be used by conservationists or others to like save the northern white rhinos, right? Because we could just simply, grow 100 of them in a lab, using these tools. Our North Star is like creating that for species preservation. Being able to engineer, like livestock to be drought resistant, being able to edit corals where they are tolerant to both temperature and salinity so we don't lose all the coral reefs, which are kind of fundamental to our ocean ecosystems, right? For us to become an interplanetary species, radiation tolerance is something that we have to think through. And that future is going to be enabled through synthetic biology, which we're at the forefront of, which is pretty cool.
Ben, welcome to Tomorrow Talk. I am so looking forward to having you on today. I love what you're doing at Colossal. You and George Church are making De-Extinction a reality, raised hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. You've put together an incredible team. So thank you so much for being on the show.
No, thanks for, that was a great intro. Thank you. So I guess we're done, but thanks for having me. We're very excited about what we're working on, and we're very thankful for our incredible investors and amazing team that are actually doing the work.
I guess just to dive into it, I think when most people hear the term de-extinction, they think of that scene in Jurassic Park where they're in the mine and they find that like piece of amber with this perfectly preserved mosquito. And that's sort of the, inception of Jurassic Park. But how did Colossal come together?
So that doesn't work exactly as advertised, right? So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we can't get DNA from mosquitoes and amber. So dinosaurs are off the table. We get that question a lot. The good thing about Jurassic Park is it showed people and taught people, like Mr. DNA, taught people about, the possibility of gene editing, got people excited about gene editing and like what the possible future through synthetic biology could happen. And so how the project started was George, for the last like 7 or 8 years, had been working on bringing back the woolly mammoth. He'd gotten a $100,000 gift to his lab from Peter Thiel, and he'd been working on it, and it actually started because different journalists, had actually asked George if it was possible. So I don't know if it was George's idea or if a journalist put it in his head, but it's some way, somehow it got planted in George's ingenious brain that this was an idea. And what was interesting was, I actually kind of like fell into the idea. So I didn't reach out to George really to talk about mammoths. I reached out to talk to George about synthetic biology and how we could apply new technologies in software and AI and automation to actually build better software, because my background's mostly software with some hardware. And then we started talking about genetically modified algae. I was really passionate about how we could use algae to combat climate change. One of my previous technologies that ended up being in the Smithsonian could sequester the same amount of carbon as 400 mature trees. So I was like, well, wow, if we could dial up the algae through synthetic biology, maybe it could be even more efficient to combat climate change. And I was on this incredible call with George, and then at the end of the call, it was almost like the Steve Jobs one more thing, where he was like, oh, and by the way, I'm working to bring back mammoths to preserve the permafrost and revitalize the mammoth steppe ecosystem to combat climate change, and I'll make billions of dollars long term with carbon credits. I have to go now. And I was like, wait, you just said the greatest thing that anyone's ever said to me in my entire life, and you ended with, I have to go now. So I stayed up all night. I was reading, I was watching all these different interviews, and regardless of what George was talking about, there was this like secret mammoth through line, right? Or maybe not so secret, but it was like always present, where people would ask him, but what about bringing back the mammoth, right? And so everyone was obsessed with it. And so, I did some, 24-hour introspection, soul searching, and every entrepreneur says they want to change the world, but most of us just build cool companies that get acquired by someone, and then those people that buy them kind of destroy them, and then you kind of do it all over again, right? We got this opportunity. I got presented this opportunity by George in the universe, and a couple weeks later, I was in George's lab talking about mammoths. We're feeling each other out, and we decided that this is something that we should go do together. And then I had to go find a CEO to replace me at my satellite software and space company so that I could go pursue this.
Wow. Okay, that's an awesome story. And what is it like working with George? I mean, George is known as like, the founding father of genomics in many ways. And then you came from this background where you had started like a bunch of like similarly bold companies actually. And so what is that like co-founder relationship? What are your kind of respective roles that you guys take on?
So what I don't think enough people know about George is like, while he is like insanely brilliant, he's really funny. And so like when I think about George, I laugh a lot because he's ridiculously funny. And I don't know, he's very dry humor, but it's really, really funny. So like I had a call with him. We had a call this morning talking about IVF and elephants, and then we talked about gestational stuff, and then it evolves. But the other thing that is interesting is like George and I kind of have a rule that we try to only schedule our meetings together at the end of the days, because we find that we both miss like we'll have a topic. So our new rules are end of day meetings, and we will start off with very few pleasantries and jump into the core things that we need to talk about, because very quickly he and I will go into strange future tangents, some of which don't even relate at all to Colossal or to De-Extinction. But working with him is just an absolute joy. And a lot of our core science team at Colossal came from his lab. And so we still have a sponsored research with George where we have more than 10 people at Harvard working on the Mammoth project under George's direction in his lab. What's interesting is that George almost has a dual role, because like while he's managing his lab, he's doing a lot of calls. I talk to him several times a day sometimes, and I'm always pleasantly surprised at the other meetings that he's already had in the day with other Colossal team members. And just working with someone that is just super kind, super a super genius and super funny. It's just for me it's a dream. It makes the hard work that we're doing seem much easier than it is.
Definitely. I think it's so special when you find those people that you just like can riff off of for hours.
We definitely riff for hours, and sometimes, like I said, it goes in very strange areas.
Direction.
And then we come up with new business ideas, and we're like, well, we should probably just focus on this right now. So
definitely. So I think, Colossal is like a sick company of just the idea of de-extinction, but you guys are like a very mission-driven organization as well.
Yeah.
How, could you kind of explain like how it can mitigate climate change and like bring back the loss of biodiversity by what technology you're building?
Yeah, so a lot of people get really excited about the de-extinction part, right? And they're like, we're excited about thylacines, we're excited about mammoths, we're excited about dodos, which is great. We are too, right? But our goal is almost, so it's kind of twofold. Is one, it's de-extinction, but secondly, it's also species preservation. And so all of the technologies that we develop on the path to de-extinction that have application to human healthcare, we're monetizing. But all of them that have applications to conservation, we're open sourcing, sharing with the world, partnering with nonprofits to ensure that they have the latest and greatest technologies, as well as our government partners around the world, so that people can actually leverage these next-gen genetic rescue technologies to save species. Because, outside of the climate disaster, which I'll talk about in a second, we're going to lose up to 50% of all biodiversity if we don't do anything. And so current conservation techniques are useful, but unfortunately they just don't work as fast as humans, eradicate species and destroy habitats. And so we need better tools. And one of our goals is to build those tools. Secondly, though, is that, we're pretty thoughtful on the why behind the species that we're bringing back. And for us, with the mammoth specifically, there's been, over 15 years of peer-reviewed papers showing that the reintroduction of cold-tolerant megafauna back into the Arctic, as well as the removal of the carnivorous trees, which are these dark bark, low carbon yielding trees that actually almost act like heat lightning rods that attract a lot of heat, permeates down the permafrost and it melts. With the removal of those trees and with the reintroduction of grazing cold-tolerant megafauna who defecate, eat the grasses, and kind of spread the Arctic grasslands, you create a system that is about 6 times more efficient at carbon sequestration with the Arctic grasslands versus the taiga forest that's there today. You also benefit from about, they've seen over the years, a drop in 8 degrees of the temperature, ground temperatures, because during the winter months, those grazing animals are also herding animals. They actually pack down the snow so that fluffy, insolent snow layer doesn't sit there and kind of keep the ground temperatures more warm. It's packed down so the Arctic winds can actually kind of pierce down to ground level and cold it. So it's really an interesting geoengineering project, right? And then they've also shown that the grasses outside of the 6 times being 6x more efficient, they've seen that there's about a 2x albedo effect of like light reflection back into space versus the taiga forest, and so everything that's not absorbed. And so you get this like rich biodiverse kind of mammoth steppe ecosystem that used to live there and which was a major climate regulator for the planet. And this is really important because there's more than double the amount of carbon in the atmosphere stored in the permafrost, more than anywhere else in the planet. So if that melts, we're all dead. So we've got to, we need to do everything we can to preserve the permafrost. And nature-based solutions just tend to be the most cost-effective and best ways at scale versus like building more technology to do like direct air capture.
I think that's fascinating. I've heard of like, there's a lot of cool startups working on like carbon transformation or air capture and these different things. But I think your approach and like bringing back the ecosystem to like when it worked at its best is really cool. Zooming in on like what you were just talking about on like sort of the technologies on the biotech side that you guys are really at the forefront of building now. So how is that going? Because I know you guys are working on like really cool concepts like artificial wombs and in vitro gametogenesis and multiplex editing. Like sort of how are those going today?
Yeah, and so it's going well. So we built these like functional teams, right? And so when you're working on anything like bringing back a species, you're not really working on a point solution, you're working on a systems problem, right? And so you've got to be innovating across a large number of areas, and you've got to build the right infrastructure and system in order to achieve it. So like we have a stem cell reprogramming group, we've got a cellular engineering group, we have an embryology group, we have an animal husbandry group, we have a computational biology group, but then we also have an exodev and an artificial womb team. And so things are moving really well from a computational biology side, an embryology side, and a cellular engineering side. Things are going better than we'd hoped at this point, which is great. We are making a lot of progress towards our artificial wombs and kind of that we call it exodev. So our exodev team is it's about a 17-person team. They're doing incredible work. It's still very, very early. We do believe that we will achieve it. I don't think that our first animals will be born ex utero. I think they will be born via surrogates. So all of that system's kind of working pretty well. We're making progress. We've established multiple cell lines in elephants. There's about 60 genes that we're editing. 20 of those we've edited and shown progress on, which is incredible. We've derived.
That's so exciting.
It's so exciting. We've actually done stem cell reprogramming on elephant cells and created induced pluripotent stem cells. We're working on some of the embryology side and some of the animal husbandry side. Hopefully we'll have some cool announcements this year around that topic. So we're trying to parallel path everything, right? Like it's not like we're just doing all the computational biology and then doing all the editing and then doing the embryos, then doing somatic, so we've tried to be thoughtful about parallel pathing these things to compress the timeline as much as biology will let us. And I'm very happy also with where exodev is today. So we don't have, we haven't grown anything ex utero, but I feel like we've got a reasonable shot of achieving it.
That would be insane. And I think so on the de-extinction front, that makes sense of like why you are working on artificial wombs. And then in terms of sort of species preservation, is there a world in which you can bring, species that aren't extinct yet but are basically having trouble adapting to like maybe hotter climates or things like that? You could essentially edit their genes to help them better survive. On that point, in like a dystopian way, could you ever like make humans that can like better survive radiation or like bring back like the strength of Neanderthals? Like, it's such a cool area.
Okay, lots of cool and weird questions there. So first and foremost, what we're ultimately building is this like de-extinction toolkit, right? Like using software, using computers, using right now scientists, but hopefully long-term robotics, and then also using having exodev systems where you can do ex utero, because when you put that all together, you're building like this de-extinction toolkit that can be used by conservationists or others to like save the northern white rhinos, right? When there's only 2 of their kind and they're functionally extinct, we could bring them back, right? Because we could just simply, grow 100 of them in a lab, using these tools. Now, we're a ways away from that, but, I think that's part of kind of like our North Star, is like creating that for species preservation. Another question that you asked around the engineering side is, being able to engineer, like livestock to be drought resistant, is something that people are very interested in. Being able to edit corals where they are tolerant to both temperature and salinity, so we don't lose all the coral reefs, which are kind of fundamental to our ocean ecosystems, right? And so we aren't working on humans. We get a lot of super soldier questions. We get a lot of questions around like Neanderthal. I don't think anyone's asking me specifically the Neanderthal question. Interestingly enough, about the radiation tolerance, though, one of our scientific advisors, Chris Mason, who's incredible, from the Mason Lab at Cornell, he's actually very, very passionate about radiation tolerance. He works very closely with NASA, works very, very closely with SpaceX, and he actually wrote a book I called like the 500 Year Human. I think that's what it's called, something like that. He'll be super pissed that I
I'll link it.
Yeah, you got to find it and link it, because it's a great book. But it shows that like for us to become an interplanetary species, radiation tolerance is something that we have to think through. And so we aren't working on that, but some of the tools that we're developing around like multiplex editing and whatnot, I think could enable that future. And that future is going to be enabled through synthetic biology, which we're at the forefront of, which is pretty cool. I don't know if we'll ever do it though.
Do you have ideas of how you would like maybe commercialize Colossal down the road?
Yeah.
Like,
So
should we ever expect a Colossal theme park, or is it sort of like selling technologies to like other biotech companies, or how are you thinking about that?
It's a great question. There's a lot of interest in Colossal theme parks. Like, we get that question all the time. Like, some of the biggest questions that we get are, about dinosaurs, about will you please make parks that are conservation focused with an educational point. My kids want to see and experience this, right? Our thought process though is, our goal is to rewild the species back into their natural habitats, right? And so that's our primary goal. So that's where our focus is. We think there's a lot of opportunities, from a monetization perspective around biodiversity and carbon credits in that, right? If we're successful in our goal, it's billions, and George is right, it's billions of dollars in carbon credits. And so we think that's a very viable, interesting business. I do think there's opportunities around ecotourism, right? And so it's like, there's like, just like you go see animals back in their natural habitats, and I'd say the other area that is a big focus for us is technologies, and then the application of those technologies to humans. So, for example, we just spun out late last year our first technology company, which is called FormBio. It's a computational biology platform, making it much easier for bench scientists to collaborate and also work with their computational biology cores. We scoured the market. We couldn't find anything that was like it in the market. And, we built the company. We were going to raise $20 million. We spun it out. We ended up raising over $30 million for that in this crazy market that we're in today, which I think is a testament to the team and the technologies that we've developed. And so I think you'll continue to see software, wetware, things that happen in the lab, and then hardware, like some of the ex utero development stuff that comes out of Colossal. And then I think we're getting a lot of interest from joint ventures where people are like, can you help us, to your drought resistant cattle? Like, can you help us with this livestock problem? Can you help us with this disease in this particular really important animal to society, right? And so we're getting a lot of those types of requests. We're not currently working on any of them, but long term we could establish some JVs as well. But for us, we aren't overly focused on the monetization side. We're just really deep on the science, because we're already seeing, in our first year, we think that FormBio is going to be a multi-billion-dollar company, and we spun that out in our first year. So it's like, I feel like we're ahead of schedule of what we promised our investors. And so as long as we keep delivering, I think people will be pretty happy with us.
On the fundraising point, like you've done an incredible job fundraising for Colossal, and I think it's because you had a great team, but it isn't an easy market, and it's only been like a year and a half really since you guys launched. So, what advice could you kind of offer other entrepreneurs that are looking to raise, especially for like mission driven companies or these sort of like bold moonshot projects? It's not necessarily this simple, SaaS model.
Fundraising in any environment's hard. Like I've never thought fundraising is easy. Maybe I'm just not good at it. I've always found fundraising hard. But you've just got I think you just need to be really thoughtful about it, right? You've got to have a great team. You've got to have a great story. You've got to build the materials in a way that tell that story. And then you really need to find the right people. And so one of the things that we were very fortunate with is we have incredible investors like Thomas Tull, who has an entertainment background, but also has a massive technology background, right? And so we've got people like Thomas Tull, we've got people like Jim Breyer that have these long-term technology visions in terms of how they look at the market, how they look at technology trends, where they're investing. And so they're patient capital. And so anytime you're working on deep tech, you need to really have people that kind of can have that runway and understand that you may have slippage, you may have issues along the way, but if they believe in that team and that thesis, then they'll support it. And then you just have to do the work, right? There's a lot of times where people think, well, I'm gonna go talk to 5 people and we'll get it done. When we first started Colossal and we were raising our seed, our pitch was, George says he can bring back woolly mammoths. We're pretty sure that's valuable. George thinks there's some carbon credits. We're pretty sure there's some technology, and we haven't signed a partnership with Harvard, and we don't have any of the technology. Please give us money. And that's a hard pitch. And so we had a handful of conversations. They were no's. And then we have another handful of conversations, and then they were yeses, right? And so you just have to do the work. It's like anything in life where it's you got to show up and do the work. That's 50% of it.
Totally. You need some thick skin, I think, for fundraising. And then do you have any tips on the recruiting side? You put together an amazing team. I'm sure a lot of those scientists could have joined labs at top tier universities or biopharma companies. How do you, get people to join your mission? Do you have any general tips for attracting that talent?
Yeah, so I'm very involved in the early stages, right? And so I feel like it's really important. I've seen this mistake in other startups where sometimes the CEOs and other companies I've invested in are very busy, and so they don't focus a lot on that. I spend a lot of time recruiting the core team. So all of our scientific advisors, all of our executive advisors, I went out and personally recruited. I don't leave that up to a random person. It's something that I think is really, if you're gonna build this incredible group of women and men that are helping steer and guide you, you need to be really thoughtful about who those people are, right?
Especially in these types of projects, the team ultimately sort of defines what the company becomes. And everything you guys are working on is difficult stuff, and it's it's not just anyone can do it.
People forget that entrepreneurship's a team sport, right? People a lot of times forget that. And then another thing people forget is that companies are just they all started off as big companies, all started off as startups at one point, and they're kind of like a multicellular organism, right? But it's if you don't have the cells, you don't have the organism. And so a lot of times people don't think about companies like that. They put this XYZ massive company is good or bad, but it's really not. Yeah. It's a function of a lot of humans there that make a lot of decisions. And a lot of times people dehumanize companies, but really it's just kind of the sum of a bunch of cells and parts.
Totally. How do you think, I feel like a big conversation on Twitter, at least these days, is how to create company culture and what that should look like. And you've started, several tech companies. How do you think about from the beginning sort of shaping the culture of that company?
Yeah, I think that it has to be both. You read books and you talk to people, and you listen to people talk about it. It's it's got to be top down, it's got to be bottom up. But I think they're both wrong. I think it's got to be both, right? It's foosball tables and beer at your job. That's not culture. A lot of people confuse that with culture. For me, it's what is the zeitgeist of the organization? What are the brand values? How do you position yourself? How do you communicate? I don't want any of our employees I want all of them. This is a moonshot. This is a world. This is a history making, world defining company, right? And so I take it very seriously. I take George's vision very seriously, and so I want to ensure that like our team does too. And so I always I want our team to work really, really hard and really, really care about it. But that means that I need to do it too, right? And so
Yeah.
they've got to see that. They've got to understand that like every day, even if I'm not in the lab, pipetting things or working on like, doing laser-based somatic cell nuclear transfer and all the crazy stuff that our amazing scientists do, they need to know that like every day I'm doing everything I can to help and support them.
Ben, I think like your career really points to this concept of moonshot thinking. I feel like you've spoken about it and you've really lived it with each of the projects you've worked on. Do you feel that that's like that attitude is increasingly alive or like decreasingly alive in technology today? Like based on signals
I'm glad you asked this question. I think it's increasingly alive. And I wish every investor said X% of my portfolio, regardless of what I'm doing, I'm going to invest in moonshots. Because and they don't, but I think that it's getting there. And here's why, right? It's like, if you're a good portfolio investor, you should say that 80 or 90% of your portfolio can return the fund, right? If you're not, then you're not doing your job. You should take 10 or 20% and say, we are going to invest in these major things that society or the world needs. And I fundamentally believe that. Now, what I will say is that I think that while COVID was a terrible tragedy and awful, I'm a pretty optimistic person, so I try to look for like the silver lining in things. And so one of the silver linings that came from that is like, I feel like everyone sat at home and watched Netflix, and like for a long time, people like just wore their pajamas. And it's like, is that the world that we really want? Like, is that what people really want? And I feel like now you've got everything like this whole like wanderlust movement where people are trying to be like digital nomads. You have people wanting to travel more than ever. And I think that you're starting to see companies that like, let's go deliver on that future that we were promised, right? Like, what is that kind of like retro futurism vibe from the 50s that we all heard about that we never like, why don't we live on Mars? Like, why don't we have flying cars? Why don't we have clean water and air for the world? Like, I feel like people now more than ever, and I think the millennials and the younger generations have to carry that torch. And I don't know if like the world needs just a 40% better software product of another product, right? I don't know if we need that, right? It's like we need direct air carbon capture. We need de-extinction and species preservation.
Yeah.
We need the SpaceXs and Teslas of the world.
I think there's this trend where it's like, if you look at like a lot of the sort of like the great entrepreneurs of today, like Elon, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, it's like everything they do originally leads them to sort of their original dream, which was like the next frontier, right? So all of them are building space companies. What is like the ultimate frontier for you, I guess?
It's a great question. So my last company does a lot in space, and I love space. I'm on the advisory board for Planetary Society and Arc Mission and others. So big space fan. I feel like there's really smart, great entrepreneurs in that category. For me, I think that the world, two areas that I'm very passionate about is obviously synthetic biology. I think that we have not scratched the surface of what's possible. I see a world where we could engineer so much into plant life, animal life, even our structures, right? Like, is there a way that we can have trees and whatnot that are engineered to be sustainable housing, right? I think that's in our power at some point, right? As humans with these technologies. So I think that this next minuscule, frontier of DNA and DNA manipulation in synthetic biology and actually engineering life is an area that I'm very, very passionate about. Number one. And number two, I'm also really passionate about the oceans, right? I'm not currently doing anything in the ocean, but it's something that I'm very passionate about. We know a lot about space. We don't know as much about the ocean, and it's here. We kind of have a really cool spaceship here that's mostly covered by the ocean, so we should probably know more about it. And so I haven't thought or built anything in that category, but it's something that I'm also pretty interested in, long term as well.
Yeah. I agree. I think there's a crazy stat, like the oceans are, how much of the ocean is undiscovered? It's a very large portion.
Yeah, it's
So
crazy,
yeah,
and that's an area I'm super passionate about.
and there's so many interesting stuff that the ocean holds. As we wrap up, what would you tell your younger self? You started your first company when you were a senior in college, just about, as you kind of entered your like entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I think that I don't think earlier in my career I loved the journey as much as I loved the outcome of like, oh, now I've got this big company, it's working really well. I don't think I appreciated the struggle as much as I should. So I think I would tell myself to appreciate those moments more because they're character building and you get humbled from them, you learn a lot from them. I think those are those moments of growth are way more important to your life than the moments of when you hit or achieve your goals, because those achievements last like 7 seconds, right? And so
Totally.
it's more about it from there. So for me, I'd say that's a very big advice I'd give myself. The other thing is like I would tell myself, I've done a lot, but I'd say do more. Like you shouldn't stop. And I think that I've always wanted to push the boundaries, and I feel like every company I've done has gotten a little bit harder. I want to continue to do that and make it more and more. Like I think Colossal I'll be the CEO of Colossal for hopefully as long as everybody wants me to be the CEO of Colossal. But there's other potential long-term interesting ideas that I could pursue 20 years from now, as long as we get like aging and anti-aging working as well. So I hope I'm not working on anti-aging. I hope a lot of really smart minds are working on that so that we can live longer and do more interesting things. But I would just tell myself to enjoy the journey and just keep, and do more.
Definitely. It's funny because in a lot of podcasts, I ask people like, what's, one thing you would be working on if not what you're doing today? And a lot of them do say sort of like anti-aging or longevity. They're just like, I hope someone's working on it, right? And it's like, I hope it kind of happens and sort of innovates at like a very rapid pace. I think we all want to be a part of like whatever happens there. And yeah, I think for my last question today, I just want to ask, like, this is kind of a weird question, but I've been thinking a lot lately about like, what is your superpower as a person, or like, what is mine, and like, how do you lean into it? Ben, what would you say is your superpower that like over time you've honed and you've gained confidence in?
So I think my biggest superpower is I learn really fast, and it's a pretty great superpower, right? Like before, I didn't know anything about molecular biology or synthetic biology before I got into this. I didn't graduate with I don't have a PhD. I didn't graduate with a focus in biology. And then, and before that, my last company is a defense company focused on satellite software, and like, that's not something that I knew anything about before. I just learned. And so I think my biggest superpower is kind of feeding that curiosity and learning. And so I really try to absorb. I watch a lot of stuff. I read a lot of stuff. I try to constantly absorb and learn. But I think my biggest superpower is I learn things reasonably fast. And hopefully that informs me to be a better person long term.
Yeah, I think that's pretty special because I think a lot of people would be deterred from building the type of companies you've built because they feel like they don't have the right technical background to do it, or like, they didn't spend like decades of their life getting their PhD in that specific area.
Like
but I mean, you've clearly proven that like you really can learn about it fast, and also like you can be sort of like the business mind that links with top scientists and professors and things like that.
Yeah, I just love building things and supporting much smarter people than me, and I feel like I have this kind of support function. But you have to learn about it, right? Because you don't know how to support people if you don't know about it. So you do have to. Once again, it's all about putting in the effort. Like you've got to put in the effort to learn these things if you want to go work on them and support people in them.
Definitely. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I am so excited about like everything you guys are working on, and I hope that in 5 or 10 years I get to see a woolly mammoth elephant.